Hey guys, this is Mitch with FinePoint CGI, and today we're going to talk about how to integrate Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code into Godot C#. And surprisingly, it's a lot simpler than you might imagine. So we're going to go through how to install C#, how to set it all up and do all of that stuff, and how to download Godot 4 and things like that. And then we're going to go and set up Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, and that's pretty much it. Now, both sections of the tutorial are not required. If you want Visual Studio, you can just jump into the Visual Studio section, and if you want Visual Studio Code, you can jump into that section as well. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first thing we have to do is we have to download Godot 4 for C#, basically. And depending on where you are in the Godot timeline, it really depends on what you need to do. So if you are using Godot 4 Beta 2, which is when this video is being created, you're going to need to come to the Godot Beta 2 article page and download the mono version. You can actually get that if you come down here to the bottom of the page. There is a .NET build right here. So if you click on that, you will see that you have a mono build right here. Now, there was conversation about combining the different versions of Godot so that way it's just one download that has both mono and GD script, so you don't need to download anything special. You could just download the regular Godot version. Now, if Godot 4 has already came out at the time of this writing, of course, we're in beta 2, but if it did come out and I haven't updated this video, you could pull it right here from the Godot downloads page. Now, I will leave a link in the description for both of these, so you can actually go and fetch whichever one is currently available to you. And this should work with future versions of Godot 4. I've talked to some of the developers and they said nothing major is going to be changing, so this should work for everybody for the future. So first, let's download the mono version of Godot, or in this case, it's the .NET 6 version of Godot. They still haven't renamed it yet, so hopefully that will happen soon. Now, if we go out to our downloads here and we extract this beta 2 version of Godot and we go ahead and we open it, and we open up, for instance, this little FPS file I have here, and we attempt to run a build. So if you come up here to the corner right here and you click build, you will see we get a fail to build project solution and the build method through an exception. Okay. And what this means is basically saying, hey, we can't build, right? And if you can't build, obviously that's a problem. And the reason why you can't build is because you need the .NET SDK, okay? Now you can get this one of two ways. You can either manually install it or you can install it via Visual Studio. And that one's up to you guys. I'm going to be going through both of the processes so you guys can see both of them. But at this point, you could basically just skip to Visual Studio, or you can stick with this and we'll go through Visual Studio Code first. Now, if we head over to .NET 6's download page, you can see here, this is where we can actually pull down the SDK. Now, you don't want the runtime. You don't need this, and you don't need the desktop runtime either, okay? You need the .NET 6 SDK. That's this side over here, okay? And if you just click on the version of the SDK you need, which in my case is right here, the 64-bit edition. So we'll download that. We'll pull that down real quick. And basically, if you do the Visual Studio route, you won't need to do this. And the link to this is in the description. So all the links to everything you need will be in the description. So I'm just going to kind of flip through them. Now, if you double click on the .NET SDK and open that up, you will see here's the installer. We'll click on install, and then we will let that run through and install. All right, now if we click close, if we open up a command prompt, so we just type CMD in our command prompt and type .NET, you will see that we now have .NET installed. We can actually type .NET dash version, and that should come back with .NET 6.0.4.402. And that's the current version that I actually have, and that's the one that we just downloaded. Now, if we want to build our project, if we come over here to Godot and we click build, you'll see failed to build project solution. Now, the reason why this is because we need to restart Godot. So we need to close Godot and then reopen it and click on FPS. Well, at least in my case, FPS, because it's my project. And then if I click build, you will see that we are doing our build and our build has come back successful right there. Awesome. So that basically is how we can build for our project. Now, if we want to open up a CS file, we can click on our CS file and here's what it looks like, which this is cool. And Godot has a built-in system to kind of highlight stuff, but you'll notice that it's not actually coming up with any syntax highlighting or anything like that, especially if it's not going to compile. You'll see it comes up with nothing. So if you're going to be doing any .NET development with Godot 4, you need to have an external code editor. And this is where Visual Studio Code comes in. So if we click on Visual Studio Code here, and again, the link for this is in the description. This is an awesome tool to do C# development if you don't want to use Visual Studio, okay? So to use it, let's click download for Windows, and it's going to say thank you for downloading it. Now, I already have it installed, but I'll run through how it works and things like that in a moment. So we'll let that download. I'll double click on it, and then you'll see, hey, it's already been installed. So I don't really know if I want to do that because it's going to blow up my stuff, but just run through the installation and you should be good to go. Now, once you have it installed, to get Godot to show Visual Studio when you're clicking on your script here, what you can do is you can go up to editor setting, and scroll all the way down to the bottom to where it says mono editor. Click on that and go up to external editor and change it to Visual Studio Code. And that's going to tell it to call out Visual Studio Code when you click on a script. Now, something to keep in mind is if this is open, it will completely break your entire C# experience. So make sure you close out that file, because I learned that if you don't, it will constantly get you into a loop where it keeps saying that the file has been edited, even if it hasn't. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, if you click on this guy, it will execute Visual Studio Code. Awesome. Now you will notice if I type GD dot, nothing happens, right? I don't have any auto completion or anything. This is where extensions comes in handy. You'll see I have a bunch of extensions already, but don't worry about any of those. They don't really matter. If you want to use C# with Visual Studio Code, you need to install the C# add-on for Visual Studio. You can search for it by typing C# and it will be right here, or a lot of times it gets recommended. So we'll install that. And that's pretty much all you're going to need to do to get Visual Studio to work with C#. So if you come over to your Node 3D, you'll see we have gd.print, and in this case, T. If I type gd dot, you will see we suddenly have auto completion. If we hit print, quote, hello from Studio Code. And there you go. And we have auto completion. We have linting, so it actually comes up and it says, hey, this is expected. We have our little icon right here to help us out with suggestions and things like that. And life is pretty much good. So now the question is, how do we debug? Well, first, if we save and we come over here and we hit right here on our breakpoint, that will allow us to actually stop at that point and use our breakpoint, right, for debugging purposes. But if we go over to our run panel here, you will see that we have this. And this isn't very useful, right? It doesn't give us any information or anything like that, okay? But if we click create a launch JSON file, you will see that we have a couple of options here. And the one that's suggested for us is .NET 5 and .NET Core. So let's click on that. Now what it's going to do is it's going to create a very simple .NET configuration here. Okay. We'll also have this .NET Core attach. And that works kind of, but not really, right? So the way that this would work is that you would need to actually tell it which process you want to attach to. And you will need to modify this for this to even work, okay? Customarily, this would work, but it's just really funky. So instead of doing this, which we can keep this, and that's totally fine. Instead, if we come down here, put a comma, and type brace, enter, quote, name, colon, quote, and we can name it whatever we want. In our case, we'll name it launch because that's just what came up. Type, and our type is core CLR, comma, enter, request, launch, that works, comma, pre-launch task. And our pre-launch task is going to be quote, build, comma, quote, program, colon, and we have to set a program path. Now, this is where things will get kind of difficult, okay? What you need to do is you need to go out to wherever you have Godot installed. In my case, it's C users, Finepoint CGI downloads, Godot 4 beta to Mono Win64, okay? Your guys' path could be something different, but in my case, this is where it's located. Now, you're going to copy this path, so copy it, come in here, paste, and we're going to need to change these guys to backslashes like this. And then we need to finish this off by including our executable that we're running. Now, if you want your command box console window, you'd have to use this one, right? But in this case, I'm going to use this one. So we'll paste that guy in there. And then we're going to come over here, comma, enter, quote, console, internal console, comma, quote, stop at entry, false. And that should pretty much do it. So now if we come up here and we click launch, you will see that it completely dies on us. And the reason why is because we don't actually have a task called build. We're trying to run this task here, and this task doesn't exist. So let's create that. So we'll click configure task, and we'll say create task JSON file from template. So click on that, and we want .NET Core because that's the actual thing we're using. We're using .NET 6, which is .NET Core. So if we click on that, it'll create a task for us. And we'll just hit Control S and then click on launch. And if done correctly, your project should launch. And there you go. You now have everything working. So now you can step over your code. You can look at your variables just like that. And that's pretty much everything that you need to know how to do with Visual Studio Code. Now, of course, depending on the project that you're working on, you may not have set your startup scene. So make sure you go to project settings and set your startup scene under run right here to the scene that you're debugging. Because if you don't, then it's not going to work and you're going to have a lot of problems when you're doing your launching. Now, the other thing that you should make sure you check out is if we take this GD test T, this little print guy, we put a breakpoint here. We get rid of this breakpoint because we don't need it. And we run our project. A lot of times I like to do this when I'm doing my project. So I like to run it and then, attach my debugging console. So if we come in here, we click .NET Core attach and we click, you'll see it's going to come up with all sorts of processes and you can pick your process. So if you type like Godot, you can see that there are a couple of Godot monos, which might be my fault. No, there's just two. So it's between these two, right? So which one do we pick? Do we pick the bottom one or the top one? If I click the bottom one, and you can see it attaches just like that. So you need to make sure that when you attach, so if I disconnect like that, and I click attach, and I type Godot, you have to pick the correct one. And unfortunately, it's difficult to know which one's correct. In this case, 166848 is the correct one. So you just click on that and bam, it connects. So it's really that simple. That's one of the cool things about the new version of Godot 4. It is actually integrated really tightly with .NET in terms of actually being a part of .NET. So that's pretty much all you need to know about how to connect your project with Visual Studio Code. Now, I know what your question might be. How do I use Visual Studio? Now, that is going to be a fun one. So, to use Visual Studio, we need to first install it. So, come out to your web browser here, navigate over to Visual Studio, and I have a link to this in the description below. I also have, by the way, this launch.json. I'll have this little bit right here in the description below so you guys can use it. So just remember that. So that way you guys don't have to type all this out. But make sure that we download Visual Studio. So we'll come down here, download Visual Studio Community Edition, click on that, and it's going to come up with a Visual Studio setup.exe. So double click on that guy, and it's going to pop up and prompt you, say yes, and then hit continue. And you're going to see it's going to download all the stuff. Now, I've already installed Visual Studio a few times for various reasons. So I already have a lot of this installed. But here's where some of the things might differ. For us, we really only need .NET development. This will pull down .NET 6. This will pull down all of the things basically we need for .NET development. But I'm going to caution you guys and make sure you guys pull down at the minimum .NET development and pull down ASP.NET. I know that this might not seem useful to you right now, but if you are creating an application that requires a API or some kind of network server, it is really nice to have ASP.NET as an option, okay? One of the things that I want to cover in the future is how to create a matchmaking server using .NET. And I can tell you for a fact that I'm going to be using the .NET ASP.NET system, or I guess technically the web API system, which is not quite this, but it gets installed with this. So just make sure you guys pull it down. Another thing that you should take a look at is downloading the desktop development environment for C++. I know specifically for this project, it's not super useful, but if you ever want to do any extensions for Godot or any native script for Godot, this is really useful for your integrated development environment. And if you want to make sure that you have stuff, you can check the .NET development, make sure that you have all the things. It should be good to go. And since we already installed .NET 6 from Microsoft's website, it's not going to re-download it and install it, but it will actually install it if you have these guys set. Now, if we click install, and this is going to take a very long time. So I will be right back because this is like 13 gigabytes of data. So it's going to take a minute. So I will be right back. All right. Now you will see that it has installed, and you can actually see the FPS solution right here. And that's just because of how things kind of worked out with Visual Studio installer. Since it reinstalled, it's going to, still show my previous stuff. But if we close these guys and we go back to Godot here and we go over to our editor settings, we scroll down to the bottom, we change our editor right here from Visual Studio Code to Visual Studio. And if we hit close, we click on our script, it is going to launch Visual Studio. Now, in my case, it's going to go full screen, so I'm going to resize this as soon as it loads it. And you will see we have Visual Studio, which is really cool. Now, it already has, if I come in here, .print hello from Visual Studio. And it's really that simple. It already has everything set up. Now, if we hit play on our FPS, it's going to attempt to build it. And you will see that it will build our project. But you will see that it says, hey, a project with an output type of class library can't be started directly. Now, how do we fix this? Well, this is where the launch profile stuff comes in. So if we come up here, we click this little down arrow, we click FPS debug properties, and we click on create a new profile executable. Okay. And what this does is it creates a launch profile. Okay. And a launch profile is basically when you click on this button, it's basically when you click this, you're running that launch profile. Okay. Now we're doing an executable and we're going to browse out to our executable and we'll pick Godot Beta 2. So you'll see that it already went to my downloads, but yours might not. So navigate out to your Godot Beta 2 mono, click on the mono Win64exe, hit open. For command line arguments, make sure you pass in --path dot --verbose. And then for working directory, just hit dot. And if we scroll down, you will see that there is enable native code debugging. You're going to want to make sure you check that. Now, if you hit close, you'll see we have profile 1. Now, you could, of course, name this anything you want. But if you already have your stuff set up here in your project settings, if you already have your main scene set up, then you are good to go. All you need to do is throw a breakpoint here, just like this. Now, if you come up here and you click on profile 1, you will see it's going to launch Godot and we will actually stop at a breakpoint. And we can actually walk through our breakpoints. We can actually drag our breakpoint around just like how it works normally. So it's really that simple. If we hit continue, you can see it loads our game and allows us to play our game. It's really that simple. Now, if this doesn't work for you, you will need to reboot Visual Studio and then it should fix your problem. I did run into a problem earlier when I was testing this a while back. For whatever reason, it worked this time, but the last time it didn't, and I just needed to reboot this. But really, it's just as simple as setting this up. I have all of these things in the description below, so you can just kind of copy and paste it. But really, it's that simple. So that's pretty much just how you integrate C# with Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. Now, if you guys have any questions or problems, hit me up in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to help you. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching. I'll see you all next time. Thanks.